Well, welcome everyone for joining us for part 2 of the continuous development pipeline, continuous delivery pipeline, sorry. My name is Dalen Walton. I'm an Agile Engagement Manager here at ICON. Today, we're going to be hearing from Dan James and Mark Ricks as they discuss the safe continuous delivery pipeline, specifically the practice domains under the continuous integration piece. This is part 2 in the webinar series. The next 2 webinars will cover the next 2 quadrants of the delivery pipeline. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about ICON Agility. Then there will be a 30-minute discussion followed by a 15-minute Q&A. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A tab and we'll try to get them answered for you at the end of the session. I would ask that when you post a question, please be sure to add context to what practice domain you're referring to. So, don't ask something like, who does that? That doesn't help us towards the end. So please provide some information and I'll get the 2 experts here to talk about it. So this session is being recorded, so we'll make a recording available to everyone after we're done here today. And we look forward to having you join us on the next 2 webinars. So a little bit about ICON. So what do we do? ICON has been around for about 29 years. We specialize in end-to-end digital transformations. Some of our claims to fame is that we have 5 SPCTs and 2 SAFE Fellows. Mark Ricks being one of these SAFE Fellows joining us here today. That's a rarefied breed. I believe there's only, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I think there's only 18, 19 of them available in the world. So we have some awesome thought leadership here today. ICON specializes in digital transformations, safe transformations, but we have specialties in both DevSecOps, lean portfolio management, agile accounting, and that sort. So we'll move on to the bios. Thank you. Today we'll be hearing from Dan and Mark. Why should you care to hear from Dan and Mark? Well, Mark actually was the principal author of the Safe DevOps class. So he's the brainchild behind that. So he's eminently qualified to speak on all things architecture and DevOps. Dan joins us as a senior Safe coach and DevOps coach from ICON. I believe Dan is on his 19th or 20th Agile transformation. So some deep experience in that regard. So I'll let these 2 take it away. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dalen.
All right. You have the floor, Mark. Or any other part of the building you wish to commandeer.
I'll take the floor.
All right.
That's where I belong. So yeah, let's pick it up here. Great to be back with you again for episode 2 of this 4-part series on a deep dive into this DevSecOps meta model. So we covered this last time. This is maybe a quick overview of this. This is part of the new 5.1 framework IP set, intellectual property set, that was released in the first quarter of this year. So more of a deep dive into the technical practices underlying DevOps and DevSecOps, clickable from the big picture there. So when you click on that little thumbnail in the lower right-hand corner of the big picture, you get a 3-part article series that walks you through the big meta model on the right. So that's what we're here to talk about, quadrant by quadrant. And last time we went through continuous exploration. So had a lot of fun deep diving into the practice domains that relate to hypothesize, collaborate, and research, architect, and synthesize. Let's pick it up there, Dan, where we left off. So last time we kind of finished with gaining alignment through continuous exploration through those DevOps and DevSecOps activities and tooling. So now we're sort of at that 3 o'clock position in the model where we're ready to build, we're ready to start slinging code, and we've done our due diligence and discovery work up front to make sure that we're aligned with our customers' expectations. We're aligned internally on the solution vision, and we have a backlog ready to implement.
Yeah, not just a backlog, but a well-prioritized backlog. And that backlog should include clear understanding of who the customer is for the various work items that the teams are going to execute on. And we need to be able to answer the question, what value does each of our stories that we've now broken out deliver to real customers. If it's highly technical work, then sometimes the customer is just another system, but we still need to have a clear understanding of the actual value that we're delivering. And so that becomes the input now to the development step. And this is clearly one of the most important steps in the entire wheel here that we see, because we keep talking about in DevOps shifting left. Well, where do we shift to? Well, a lot of it gets shifted to this step that we're going to discuss here. So highly, highly important.
That's right. We're doing a lot of shift left, but who are we shifting left onto? It's a lot of these people, right? And it's evident here. So when we're in this develop step, we're not just developing. It's not just about programming. It's not just about having that IDE open and writing code, right? We have to think about so many things at this step, and think about what our developers and Agile teams are having to do at this step, what we're asking them to do to make sure that quality is built in, that security is built in, and that we're aligned to our customers' objectives. It's a lot, right? So that's why we have this stack of practice domains that come into view in this develop step. And those are the bullet points on the slide. We have to think about all of these things. So I know that you have a passion for testing. So one of the things I wanted to bring up right away in this develop step is a test-driven mindset. So this intersects continuous security and continuous quality practice domains. So in the field, how should people be thinking about this develop step from a test-driven point of view?
Well, first of all, let's understand what a defect is. A defect is a missed test. We can define defects in many, hundreds of ways, but they usually boil down to somebody didn't test something. And so we need to understand what is the negative value, the cost of a defect. And if we can catch a defect at this develop stage, it may cost us $50 to fix it. If it is allowed to escape and go downstream, it will probably cost us about $500 to find and fix it. If we allow it to get released, it could be another order of magnitude in cost, plus potentially annoyed or lost customers. So poor initial quality is a vampire of cost, time, and team productivity. And everything speeds up if we can provide initial quality, and so that we can avoid the rework. The lack of rework means speed. So it improves our time to market, et cetera. So there are a lot of aspects here. When we're shifting left, it puts a huge responsibility on the teams to ensure that quality is built in. And it's not just that the functionality is working as advertised, but that it's got, as you mentioned, the embedded security issues and even compliance issues built in. The telemetry, how are we going to measure the results? The business value, et cetera, et cetera. Do we have everything built in? And yes, it may take us a little more time to build it right the first time. But if there's no rework as a result, we save a huge amount of time, going downstream. And so there are a lot of coaching questions, and we probably don't have enough time to really examine everything that I would be asking a team here. But some key questions related to testing is, how do I know as a coach or as the developer that we can trust the code that the team just finished writing? And if they did not use test-driven development, then no one can trust that code. And it doesn't matter how experienced the developer. If you cannot prove the quality of your code, then it is suspect. And that's why we say a legacy app, even one that you just finished writing, becomes legacy if you did not use test-driven development to write it. And then up a level in testing, how do I know that we haven't written unnecessary code? Well, test-driven development helps us write only the amount of code necessary to pass the test. It eliminates a lot of unnecessary code writing because it takes the guesswork out of what done means. And so by now we've already talked during synthesize here of using behavior-driven development, which is our acceptance tests basically, and the functionality of the code, the behaviors of the code itself. We are now writing and automating those tests during this phase. So all of this is important to delivering high quality functionality as well as the high quality code underlying it. So these are the concerns that a good Agile coach would have at this step.
Yeah, so really important thoughts there. Think about quality and security on the way in. We want to shift those left, along with these other practices, right? It's not just about security and quality, but we want to have good version control in place. We want to make sure that our branching and merging strategies are conducive to continuous delivery, right? Maybe doing trunk-based development. If you're not doing trunk-based development, to make sure that your branches are short-lived and you're getting back to trunk or getting back to main as quickly as possible. Agile planning and design. So this domain brings into focus our Agile project management tools and planning tools, our backlogs and boards, making sure that we know where the work is and the teams are pulling in the right work at the right times, right? And managing that flow very effectively. We start to see elements of configuration management coming in here. This is a particular favorite of mine because here we start to see teams developing things other than code, right? We're developing scripts that we're going to use for infrastructure as code and maybe even immutable infrastructure practices later. So we're creating those scripts at this level. We're storing them in version control along with everything else, and all of that kind of plays together in managing this part of the value stream.
Yeah, and those scripts are testable as well. Any scripts that we write in that configuration management side, including the security and compliance and everything else, all those scripts are testable.
Cool. Should we move on to build?
All right, let's do that. Build early, build often would be the mantra here.
So here in Scaled Agile, we, if you've been through the material and if you've been through our Safe DevOps course, you'll recognize the difference between develop and build. But here, sort of on the surface, they can seem like the same thing, right? So oftentimes you get the question, what's the difference between developing and building? They look like the same thing. Well, here in the transition from develop to build, we're going from human readable source code to binary, right? This is where we're doing the compilation steps. We're doing some initial testing. This is essentially our entry point into our CI/CD pipeline. This is where we're consolidating that work from, say, the IDEs, and we're getting it into the repo and tested and packaged for delivery downstream. So a lot of things come into view here too. This is our first view of what we call the deployment pipeline in this model. So this is, think of the deployment pipeline as our analog of the CI/CD pipeline. This is where we're committing the code, and that invokes a series of operations that hopefully automate the steps in this build process to get that code integrated and into trunk and packaged for delivery. I want to make sure here that we leave this step with deployable code. We want to make sure that that code base is always in a deployable state, and this build step helps us do that. And if the quality isn't there, we're going to pull the cord and we're going to back up a step.
Yeah, exactly. This is our first opportunity to pull that cord and stop the line. From here, nothing should be allowed to go downstream if it fails a quality gate that we may have established here, what we would call, gated commits. And the gated commits go to code security. It goes to all aspects of the product that we have developed. The code smells, do we have properly formatted code? Do we have, properly structured code? Did it follow solid principles, et cetera? So there are a lot of things that can be tested during the build, including rerunning all the unit tests that were created on the development machines back in the develop step. We can now run them as an automated suite here. It takes just a few seconds. In fact, if it takes more than 10 seconds to run all the unit tests, then that's slow. So, but here's the opportunity to ensure that now that all the code has been checked in, that we're getting the feedback as a team that we need, and that the team can immediately swarm on a broken build. That should be the #1 priority of the team, is if we break a build, it should be well publicized, which team broke it, so that they know they can jump on it immediately and fix it.
Right. So I think a core idea here is the level of automation we start to see in the flow of work. Upstream of this, there's been a good amount of manual work, right? Especially up in continuous exploration. We're doing things like design thinking, we're architecting, we're modeling. There's some tools that we apply there. But then as we get into develop, we start to see more automation, IDE plugins, and some more tooling. But here in this build step is where we start to see a really significant amount of automation applied in that deployment pipeline. So if we kind of look at this stack from the top down, that deployment pipeline is front and center, it's first and foremost, and that's the thing that's orchestrating activities through this step and some other steps. And it's helping us to automate configuration management and automating the inputs and outputs of version control and automating security and quality and value stream management. So this is where we start to see DevOps really start to kick in and accelerate. Now, Dan, you have a cool analogy for this part of the pipeline. You've referred to this as a conveyor belt. Does that have something to do with the level of automation we start to see here?
Yeah, once you put something on the conveyor belts by design just continue to roll. And so if I can put it on the conveyor belt and everything is automated as it flows down, at least to the staging level or to a non-released production deployment, then that gives us our, the flow that we're looking for. Not only does the build tell us whether we have a viable product or not, but at this point, we want to be able to see that everything is automated as it flows forward in the deployment pipeline. If it isn't automated, then we're going to have these artificial stops along the way that just slow us down. Like Amazon, they only have 2 manual steps in code, creation. The initial coding and then a peer review. After peer review, it gets on the conveyor belt and it doesn't stop until it's all the way out the door. So, if we have built in our quality properly in the previous step, then this build should be the gateway to that conveyor belt, and it should allow the code to proceed.
I like it a lot. So the deployment pipeline is doing a lot of work. Here's where we sort of turn it over to the robots. We make sure that we've got the robots in place, and we initiate that build, and the pipeline takes over. And it's going to orchestrate these activities. One thing interesting about configuration management that we're doing here is that we're going to pull those configuration scripts in. We're going to test those too, just along with the code and everything else. So we start to pull in from version control. We're also going to output to version control as we're building the deployment artifacts, maybe the binaries, the images here in this step, and we're going to store those in version control or some kind of a repository as well for use downstream. And of course, automating the heck out of security and quality. We're going to shift those left. Security as code, vulnerability scans, quality tests, really building up that test pyramid. And then from a value stream management perspective, this is where we start to see objective evidence of where the value is or is not in our solutions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So
Great.
We've had a successful build, and some of that automation and scripting that we may be doing here is preparing for the next step, which could be done in parallel. It doesn't all have to be done in a single environment. There may be different suites of tests that we want to cover, and we can speed up the process if we separate them out. And instead of running them serially, we can run them in parallel. So that's something in our configuration management here that we can be thinking about. If infrastructure is code in our organization, then we may be able to create a parallel path to doneness and to testability here. So that's something that we're thinking about right here at the end of build as we move into test end to end.
Why don't we do that? Let's head into test end to end.
Great idea, Mark. I'm glad you thought of it.
How's that for a seamless segue?
Oh man, that was great.
So here, test end to end. So one thing we wanted to make clear here in this part of the model is that this is not the only place we're doing testing. We've already started to think about it, and we're building quality in, right? And notice that those continuous quality and continuous security rings go all the way through the continuous delivery pipeline. So those are always in play. So we're definitely not saying here that this is the first time we're testing. Testing is not a phase in the continuous delivery pipeline, but this is where we tend to do the big, heavy end-to-end testing, the bulk testing, usually the kind of testing that trips up a lot of teams and creates a lot of delay in the system. So we call that out specifically here because it's important, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining flow through this part of the continuous delivery pipeline. But these are things like, regression testing and integration testing and full end-to-end scenario testing, user experience testing, right? Really testing the business behavior that we need to be there that demonstrates full value in the solutions that we're building.
Mm-hmm. The question I would ask as a coach is, how valid are the tests that we're running here? And it's only going to be as valid as the congruity of the environment that they're running in. How close to production environment is it? Does it mimic the release environment? And the tests that are run in that environment are going to be the most valid. If this is an artificial environment that doesn't have all the connectivity that we do out in release form, then our tests may not be testing everything that's needed. We may not be getting a clear picture that the quality is there and that everything should, function properly. Also, I would ask teams, have we covered all the scenarios that the business feature requires? In other words, all our BDD work that we did up front to build our scenarios, is all that being tested here? That's part of our acceptance testing. Including our NFRs, including, whatever automation is necessary, including our configuration scripts, et cetera. And at the end, nothing should go downstream from here if any of the test suites fail. Any test fails, we pull the cord again. So the key here is confidence. How confident are we that if all of our end-to-end tests pass, that we could release that new software immediately? Or is there some artificial bottleneck waiting for us at the end of this before we could release? If we're confident in the quality, then the conveyor belt should go ahead and promote it and carry it forward. If not, what test did we miss? Was it a compliance test, a security test of some kind? Could those tests have been shifted left and added to an automated suite that would give us the empirical feedback that we need and allow us to have that confidence, in the result of this end-to-end testing? In other words, can we prove that we're delivering quality, security, compliance, recoverability, telemetry, and all that and meeting our business SLAs and KPIs all in this test suite?
So in order to make sure that we've got a deployable solution here with value built in, you're saying that we want to make sure that we have all of the tests we need, right? And one of the things that we've talked about just sort of between us is the idea of sort of having a mantra at this stage of miss no tests. One of our goals should be, we have not missed any tests at this stage. Not just that we've run the tests we have, but do we really know that we have not missed any tests? We don't want any code to leak by that doesn't have a test associated with it. So are there any, say, metrics or checks that we can do to make sure that we have missed no tests?
Yes, there are. And that would include checks of our test data. So version control isn't just for code or scripts. It's also for potentially for test data. The caveat there is that if you're like a financial services company or a healthcare industry, you have a lot of regulations applying to your production data. But guess what? The same regulations apply to your test data. So if you're encrypting in transit or at rest that data in production, then your test data has to have the same treatment. And so, having your test data in version control so that you can do time travel forward or backwards to run various test scenarios is extremely important. And we would want to be able to, to ensure that not only is the environment congruent with production, but our test data mimics production data as closely as possible. and that all tests related to both are passing, as well as the security and other tests.
Cool. So maybe just to quickly recap the stack here before we move on to stage. We start at the top. We started the deployment pipeline, and we're on the conveyor belt still, and we have a significant amount of automation here. The pipeline is helping to pull this work through this stage, executing tests. We want to have a significant amount of automation here, maybe different kinds of tests, different kinds of security checks, whatever makes sense for the context, right? And from a configuration management perspective, maybe we're actually leveraging some of those configurations, some of those infrastructure as code scripts. Maybe we're even building test environments on the fly that are fully production capable or production grade, right? So we may be leveraging the assets that we have in configuration management and version control to actually set up the environment so that we can execute this stage. We talked a lot about security and quality, executing the tests and having the systems there to do that, and for that feedback, those results to show up in real time in that deployment pipeline through dashboards or reports that are highly visible to the development teams and the people who are managing this step. And from the value stream management standpoint, like we see a lot of cord pulling happening at this step in lower maturity teams, right? But the more you advance your DevOps capabilities, the more you're covering everything you need to cover, the more you're missing no tests, and you've ensured that you've got quality baked in. From a value stream management perspective, you have value and you're continuing the flow and not having to pull that cord and pull back to an earlier step. Anything else to add there, Dan, before we move on?
No, I think we've covered this one.
Okay.
And if everything has gone well here, the next step should be short. If things haven't gone well here, then it may need to pause. But that's what pulling the cord means sometimes. So let's take a look at staging here.
Yeah, so that's a really important point. If we've done everything well here, staging could be easy. A lot of times a staging environment is where traditionally folks have done a lot of testing, maybe user acceptance testing, maybe integration testing, maybe some of that end-to-end testing. And historically, a lot of that testing has been really manual, right? So if we haven't had quality built in, and if we haven't verified that quality is there and security is there in a production-like environment, we don't have high assurance that we've got what we need to. We don't have high assurance that we have what we need to have in order to demonstrate value. So sometimes that staging environment is a big environment where there's a lot of activity, a lot of volatility, and a lot of final preparation and final validation that quality is there before we're deployment ready. But that's not what we want, is it?
Right. In many cases, any activity that we would do at this stage, pun intended, would be automatable and shiftable upstream. Like UAT doesn't always have to be a manual step. Once you've done a UAT manually, it should be able to be codified and automated for all future tests of that functionality. So UAT could be moved upstream over time, through attrition. Any manual approval boards or pre-release management meetings, the questions that are covered in those meetings could be replaced with automated upstream tests and included in the end-to-end testing instead of us stopping here in staging and waiting for an approval. In other words, let's keep the conveyor belt moving here. Any last-minute smoke tests might be simply added to the automated end-to-end testing suite as the last group of tests that are run so that's part of an automated suite. In other words, doesn't require that we actually stop and run them here. So there are a lot of things that we might want to do in staging, especially early in our maturity DevOps. But eventually, we want to move those things upstream as well.
Great. So we want to move more toward lightweight staging, and from using a staging environment or a staging step as an opportunity to inspect for quality. Hopefully, we would have already done that, and use the staging environment maybe for showcasing instead. Maybe at this point, we know that we've got the value there. We've already demonstrated that, but here's an environment that we can use to showcase the value that we have, maybe to stakeholders, to business owners, to customers. One look at it before it rolls into production. Maybe we can start to do some training in this kind of environment, but the idea should be that when we get to staging, the value should be there, and we only hang around in staging as long as we need to verify that we are indeed production ready. And that should be a relatively quick step, especially if we're automating compliance and automating change management procedures and policies into that pipeline.
Yeah. So ask the question right here at this stage. What is the question that we care about? Is what is stopping us from deploying to production right now? Now, we may not have enough accumulated new value, or there may still be an issue. We may not have run all our threat models. There may be some penetration tests that we need to do last minute, kind of like security smoke tests. But the key question is, are we ready for production? And can we answer that? If the answer is yes, then leave it on the conveyor belt and let it go to the next step, which we'll cover in our next webinar.
I see what you did there.
How's
Great
that for
ad
a segue?
placement.
Yeah, you like that?
Nice. So that's a wrap. That's a quick walk through the DevOps practice domain stack for each of these continuous delivery pipeline activities. Should we open it up for a Q&A?
Sure.
I think that's a great idea. We've got a couple of good questions in here and some comments. I just want to add on that from listening to Mark and Dan, I think they would agree that the move to staging and deployment should be, in Mark's words, should be a non-event if you followed all these steps up to that point. Dan has this beautiful phrase that he calls faith-based code promotion. I'm sure that rings a bell with some of you out there in the interwebs when everyone gets together on a Saturday and prays that nothing blows up when it goes into production. So that's what we're trying to avoid. So a couple of questions that we have for you guys. The first one is, how complicated should the continuous integration pipeline be, and what should be contained in that pipeline, what should be executed each time a developer checks in code? Lots of companies don't want to beef up the CPU resources for this, but isn't this critical, especially if we have left shifted security tools into the pipeline?
Yeah, it's absolutely true that a lot of companies cherry pick various test suites to run and don't do the full stack testing in continuous integration. That is a mistake. You never know that if a piece of code that I have changed may have a cascade effect on other parts of the code that were unintended, which also means that we're not doing a good job of encapsulation in our code. But the key here is we're not going to know that unless we run the full suite. And yes, that may mean beefing up the infrastructure, hopefully infrastructure as code, to accomplish it. And that's why I said early on in the previous step here that we want to make sure that our testing is valid, and it isn't valid if we haven't run all the tests. In other words, I may not be able to trust the code that is flowing through the pipeline. And yes, it will cost additional money to have a pipeline that has the capacity to do full end-to-end on demand, for every code commit, or you may have a scheduled end-to-end. It may not be a conveyor belt. It may be a stutter step, but in order to have the capacity to do it. But the key here is that if you don't run all the tests every time, you are adding risk to what is going downstream. And for us to be able to make our release a non-event, a low-risk event, we need to know that the quality is there, not guess that the quality is there.
What I would add to that is your tool chain, your deployment pipeline is going to be a reflection of your current processes. So if you're applying automation to get to automate your delivery process, you will have as much complexity in there as you need to get through your controls, to get through your steps and through your policies. So if you're finding that as you're automating your pipeline, it's getting complex and unwieldy, and it kind of seems like the Wild West. Well, maybe your process is complex and unwieldy and is the Wild West. So make sure that you're streamlining the process, you're enabling lean flow, and you're not automating a broken process. That can help. But these often need to co-evolve. So evolve into a streamlined, simplified CI/CD pipeline that works just well enough.
That's right. And when we're teaching safe DevOps, we literally map out your pipeline step by step, and we uncover the bottlenecks, and we uncover the process failures that occur in that value stream, in that technical value stream, and expose it and actually measure it using percent complete and accurate and lead times and so forth. And that exposes where we need to focus our investment to eliminate those biggest bottlenecks. And sometimes it's the process itself that is defective, not the product flowing through it.
Thank you, gentlemen. I would add to that in regards to automation, I think there is a tendency to rush towards automation for the sake of automation. And a very, very important step that you need to follow is to lean out and look at that process first before you automate it, because automating a bad process just gets you a bad result faster.
Yeah,
which is not what we're trying to do.
That's correct. We automate healthy processes. We don't want to automate right off the bat, and that's why automation is a later improvement, a later investment in a DevOps construction stage. We want to make sure that we're recoverable first, that we're measuring things, that we have optimized the lean flow from process to process, from step to step in our pipeline, and then we automate things. And that's what really moves the needle for us.
This next question, I think, is squarely in Dan's wheelhouse, because TDD is near and dear to your heart. So for test-driven development, who is responsible for driving that change into an Agile release train? We're having issues where a train where TDD has not taken hold. The RTE is happy to show metrics, but does not feel that they should be defining them. The PM CPO feels that they should be the what and not the how. The line management thinks it should go back to the RTE. Do you have any ideas on how to break this cycle?
Well, if we are going to build quality in and be able to guarantee it, and this is why we're shifting left, the response is not just the activities, but the responsibility for initial quality back to the teams. So if we're going to do that successfully, then the team needs to the extent possible with the tooling that they have, adopt extreme programming practices, which are simply 7 of the 12 Agile principles put on steroids, basically double down on 7 of those principles. XP practices, things like collective ownership, pair programming, test-driven development, et cetera. These practices will help us ensure that quality is built in. Now, is it convenient to the organization or to the teams to do test-driven development? And I would say, especially early in the transformation process, it is not convenient. You will get a lot of whining from both leaders and managers and teams that this is burning a lot of time. But what happens over time is we see that there's no rework happening downstream when they are doing TDD upfront, and letting that actually drive the design of their code, because they're going to actually be writing less code if they're using test-driven development. It takes the guesswork out of what done means, and downstream we're going to have less rework, which will then make the business happy because our time to market has not been affected negatively once the teams are good at it. The act of test-driven development is you're spending 30 seconds to 60 seconds writing a test, and then spending 30 to 60 seconds writing code to pass the test, and then back and forth in your code. Guys that get good at this, guys and girls that get good at this, can literally write production code in the same time it would have taken them to do it the old way, except now we can guarantee the quality of the code. And that's the beauty of test-driven development. It puts money in the pocket of the organization that practices. And so there's a financial reason to do this. like losing customers is a negative financial result of not doing test-driven development. We want the code that makes it all the way down to staging to be bulletproof and that we can sleep at night. And that's, these are just some of the ways to get the message across that if we're not doing test-driven development, we have a flawed SDLC going. It's incomplete. And as a coach, I would not trust the code of a developer or a team that does not practice TDD. I would just not trust it. The app that they're building without TDD is already legacy. Even though it's new code, it's already legacy.
And Dan would say, other than that, he has no opinions on the subject.
I was about to say that, but
that's my cue.
Me to it.
That's Mark's cue. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, so we have to remember that TDD is a team level tool. It's a team level technique. It's not an art level technique. It's not an organization technique. So, a lot of times pushing TDD onto teams from other domains can be like pushing a wet noodle. It's not going to get traction unless the teams feel a need to do it, right? So that practice has to be pulled in and cultivated and nurtured by the teams themselves. Now, what motivates the teams to do TDD? Usually in the environments that I've seen that are resisting TDD, the development teams aren't accountable for quality. Somebody else is. It could be testers. It could be an offshore center of excellence. It could be operations support, somebody else in the organization. But when the development teams understand that they have accountability for quality and they're holding themselves accountable for their own quality, they start looking for tools and techniques that can serve them. So that might be a place to start.
Yeah. And I like teams to ask this question during their retrospectives or during their sprint planning is, what practices do we need during this next iteration? What practices do we need to adopt to deliver the value that has been identified in the stories that we're going to build? And in some cases, if they're not test-driven development, that may be one of the practices. Now, we're not talking about everybody on the team has to just stop what they're doing, learn TDD, and then go back to work. In some cases, you might have one person on the team that is an extremely, well-rehearsed doing test-driven development, and they can basically train through pair programming the other people on the team, and through attrition over a period of 2 or 3 sprints, the skills are built into the team culture. And I've had many coaching experiences where we did it that way, through attrition, through using pair programming or even mob programming, that test-driven development was inculcated into the culture of the team. And it became, the norm at that point. Test-driven development is not something unique to Agile. It started back in the 80s, with extreme programming. So it's been around a long time and has, for some reason, never gone away. And you can tell the products that have been built using it is they're usually bulletproof with their first release. And it's a competitive advantage to do this.
We're just about at time, but we have one last one for you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Coming from Stephen Mullins, as we integrate our operations team, there's been a question of how many environments do we need? Developers, staging, production flow, UAT. What do you see in the field? Are people just using 3 environments, or do they have more? I mean, how many is too many? How many do we need for best practices?
Well, I don't think you can ever have too many, so I'm just saying, but Mark, do you have a comment on that?
I wanted you to go first.
Okay.
I think, it depends, obviously, right? It depends. But one thing to keep in mind is that nowadays it should be very easy to set up and tear down environments. So if we're leveraging these tools, if we're leveraging these techniques, if we need an environment that we don't have, it's not a matter of, or it shouldn't be a matter of submitting a ticket for a team to get to at some point to provision servers and provision data so that we have an environment, and then care and feed for that thing, over the lifespan of whatever. If we need an environment, we should be able to press a button and get that environment. And then when we're done with it, we should be able to let it go. spin it down. So I kind of look at it from that point. It's not a matter of how many environments we need. It's how we're going to get those environments when we need them.
And a recent client, pushed back on the idea of going to the cloud in order to have the convenience of being able to have infrastructure as code and push button environment spawning and so forth. And they were apparently unaware that you could actually have a private cloud in your own server farm on-prem where you can mimic what you could do in the cloud within that environment. And then later on, as you can afford to go to the cloud and pay those subscription fees, et cetera, that you could then migrate from your private cloud to the public cloud and continue there as you grow. And that would save you from further investment in a lot of internal infrastructure. But you can literally mimic infrastructure as code in your own private cloud. So it simplified the process of spawning and despawning environments for testing purposes, especially since they were sold on the idea of using parallel environments for various types of testing in order to save time in the pipeline.
Well, folks, we are at time. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. All the registrants today will be receiving a recording of this webinar. And as always, if you're interested in further discussions or how Icon can help support you in your either DevOps journey or safe journey, Agile, TDD, some of the things we talked about today, please be sure to reach out to us. We're happy to talk. We love this stuff. We live and breathe it. So if you're interested in having a deeper dive in any one of these sections or practice domains, we can help make that happen. So I'd like to thank Dan and Mark for another excellent webinar. Please set your calendars for the next one where we talk about the next two wedges in the continuous delivery pipeline, and we look forward for you joining us then. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time. Thank you.